Begin the mission.
I have a little bit of a strange relationship with the Gundam. Last year, after I made a video where I talked about its performance in Gundam Battle Operation 2, I gave some of my thoughts on how it might be improved. Then, about a week later, an update was released to buff the Gundam. Some laughed at the timing, but it was clear even back then that my video still held up because that buff essentially did nothing to improve its performance. Even still, some older players still speak of a forgotten time when the Gundam was actually good. This was apparently long ago before the ecosystem changed drastically and the evolutionary arms race left it behind. Now, while any hope for the Gundam returning to its former self in GBO2 has pretty much gone the way of Concord and Gundam Evolution, perhaps in Gundam Breaker 4 there is still a faint and distant chance that it can one day rise from the ashes so that some may remember the name. Much like with the GM Sniper 2, the Gundam is also missing from the game, meaning that it needs to be built from scratch, using parts from other mobile suits. And just like before, we should expect to have to make some compromises along the way. For the legs, I went with the full armored Gundam Thunderbolt's legs. This is the closest I could find to the Gunner's legs, and these sort of fit the build not just visually, but also lore-wise as well, since it's been rumored that the full armored Gundam's design was used to shorten the development of the Gunner. These legs also come with their own Ni 6 tube missiles, which also sort of fits the bill since there is rumored to be a full armor version of the Gundam as well. So these legs, I believe, fit the bill perfectly when taking all of this into consideration. You might be quick to assume that the RX-78 Gundam's torso would be used for the body, but the Gunner's body has a camera on the left chest, and because of this, I went with the GM2 Semi-Striker's body. Picking this part is essentially jumping the timeline since the Gundam was built right after the 1-year war, while the GM2s don't appear until Zeta Gundam. But this is really as close as it gets as far as I can see. Also, there was a mock version of the Gundam using a GM as the base. I'm pretty sure it wasn't the GM2, but hey, compromises. The arms were probably the trickiest because they are, for the most part, just the Gundam's arms with some stuff added on top. But doing that would require some builder parts, and we only have 8 slots for builder parts, so we have to use them sparingly. I therefore settled on the Gundam GPO-1 arms. This is jumping the timeline again by some 3 years, but visually the shoulders sort of fit the bill. The head was the simplest since I just went with the Gundam's head. That's really it. The backpack is essentially the same as the Gundam's, but with 2 more engines added to the back. Because of this, I settled with a GM2's backpack, since it does have 4 engines on the back instead of 2. Okay, now for the fun part. To give the arms that sort of arm wristband or gauntlet look, like the Gunner has, I just give it 2 armed grenade launchers. For the back sensor pod, I used the Verdome part and equipped it on the backpack. Unfortunately, I couldn't get rid of the beam saber visually taking up space. But again, compromises. To finish off the sensor pod, I used a long C funnel to make it look like an antenna. The Gundam also has an additional sensor on the right side of its back. For this, I used the Mercury Level A Unit 3 part. Obviously, it's not a sensor or camera, but visually, it's passable. On the Gunner's body, there's also some kind of harness, or actually, I'm not sure what it is, but to give it this look, I used a horn sensor. And most importantly, for the right side extra sensor on its head, I used an eye field generator and colored it to make it look like an extra sensor. I should also mention that I added an extra C funnel and hid it inside the body. That way I can actually get the most out of the funnels. Definitely not canon, I know, but I figured since the part is already there, might as well get the most out of it for this game. For a more accurate build, if we were allowed more builder part slots, I would have instead equipped some pistols or grenades. But once again, say it with me now, compromises had to be made. Moving on to the weapons, I used a GN beam rifle long barrel type GN13. It's not exactly like a sniper rifle I used with the GM Sniper 2, but the Gundam was meant more for mid-range. So, oh well. It's as close as it gets to the actual Gundam's beam rifle, as far as I can tell. There were about 2 other options, but I ultimately settled on this one. Now, something that a lot of players have asked for in GPO2 is for the Gundam to be given an additional secondary weapon. And here in Gundam Breaker 4, we can do just that. Since the Gundam was developed just after the 1-year war, I decided to give it the beam spray gun. Definitely not a flashy weapon by any means, but I can easily picture the Gundam using it. For the melee weapons, I just kept the same beam sabers from the last video. And lastly, before I forget, the shield. The Gundam doesn't actually have a shield, which means that for this game, we can essentially pick whatever we want so long as it's not visible. And for this, because I'm really low on skills, both EX and OP, I went with the field shield. Yeah, I know, as far as cannon-wise goes, not possible. But for Gundam Breaker, it'll do just fine. It has an OP skill that increases my defense, and also gives me an extra EX skill as well. And looking at the full list of skills this suit has, it's probably the weakest I've ever built. Almost like it's always an uphill battle with anything Gundam related. But here's the list. For EX skills, I have 2 sea funnels as a result from using one of them as an antenna. I also laugh every time a gatekeeper cries when I'm breaking one of their made up sacred rules. Same goes for the IFS unit. And for the first time in these videos, I went with the master skill to give it a beam saber attack. For OP skills, we have head Vulcans from the Gundam's head, which we're not going to use for this video, a beam saber from the backpack, 2 armed grenade launchers, the legs knee 6-2 missiles, an IFS shield, lance, and lancer shot, and lastly, an I-field generator. Like I said, this is probably the weakest suit I've ever built, which is why this next part is the most surprising. Okay, so this suit makes absolutely no sense. You all saw the skills and weapons it has on. The skill cartridges also the same as the previous ones. So how it was able to make it further in survival than the GM Sniper 2 and Alex, I'm not really sure. From the very beginning of my survival test run, I didn't have high hopes for it. And yet somehow, there were moments where it shined pretty bright. And when it didn't, it somehow kept getting lucky. After wave 35, which I'm surprised it made it that far, I thought for sure that was it. There was no way it would be able to go any further. Surely wave 37 would be it at most. And every time I thought that was it, it would get extremely lucky by getting a ground break on a boss enemy. And then it just kept going. It probably would have gone for even further if it weren't for one simple mistake I made in wave 45. For the most part, I think I had the wave beat. It was just me trying to use an EX skill that did me in at the end.
Aw, mission failed. I know you can do better.
Looking over at the stats, I think maybe the reasons why the Gundam made it further was because the beam sabers I use are now a few levels higher than they were when the GM Sniper 2 and Alex used them. Then there's the field shield. It is pretty much the same as its IFS unit build-apart version, but I think the shield version is clearly stronger, since it can be leveled up, whereas the build-apart version cannot. But that about does it for my time with the Gundam. Although the suit does look visually appealing, I don't think I'll be using it anytime soon again. Anyway, that about does it for this video. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. I am working on some new stuff, so a subscription will help you stay notified when a new video comes out. As always, Mobile Suit K9 signing off.